Imagine a boy sitting alone in a quiet room. He is not playing. He is not talking to anyone. He is just thinking. His mother looks at him and feels worried. His teachers shake their heads. His classmates laugh at him. Everyone around him believes this boy will never be great. But this boy has something special inside him, something no one can see yet. This boy is Albert Einstein, and this is his story. Albert Einstein was born on March 14, 1879, in a small city in Germany called Ulm. The city was quiet and peaceful. The streets were lined with old stone buildings. The air was cold and clean. His father's name was Hermann Einstein. His mother's name was Pauline Einstein. They were a simple, loving family. Hermann was an engineer and a salesman. Pauline was a kind and intelligent woman who loved music. When baby Albert arrived into the world, something strange happened. His head was very large and oddly shaped. The doctor looked at the baby with concern. His grandmother saw him for the first time and whispered quietly, "He is too fat. He is too fat." But Pauline held her baby close and smiled. She was not afraid. She believed her son was perfect. Little Albert was slow to speak. Most babies start saying words by the time they are 1 year old, but Albert did not speak until he was almost 3 years old. His parents became very worried. They took him to doctors. The doctors examined him carefully. Some of them shook their heads. They could not explain why this boy was so quiet. But Albert was not silent because he had nothing to think about. He was silent because he had too much to think about. His young mind was working all the time. He was watching the world. He was asking questions inside his head. He just had not yet found the right words to say them out loud. When Albert finally began to speak, his family noticed something unusual. Before he said any sentence, he would whisper it softly to himself first. He would test the words inside his mind before letting them out into the world. His sister Maria, who everyone called Maja, was his closest friend. She was born 2 years after Albert. The two of them grew up playing together, exploring together, and asking questions together. "Why does the wind blow, Albert?" Maja would ask, and Albert would sit very still, thinking hard, before answering slowly. "I do not know yet, but I want to find out." That was always his answer. Not, "I do not know." Always, "I want to find out." When Albert was 5 years old, he became very sick and had to stay in bed. His father wanted to cheer him up, so he brought him a small gift. It was a magnetic compass. Hermann placed it in Albert's small hands and showed him how it worked. No matter which way Albert turned the compass, the little needle always pointed north. Albert stared at it. He turned it left. The needle moved back to north. He turned it right. The needle moved back to north. He shook it gently. The needle swung, trembled, and then moved back to north. Something invisible was making that needle move. Something Albert could not see, could not touch, could not smell. But it was real. It was powerful. And it was working quietly, without making a sound. Albert's eyes grew wide. His heart began to beat faster. "Father," he said quietly, "what is making the needle move?" Hermann smiled and tried to explain. But even his explanation was not enough for young Albert. The boy wanted to understand more. He wanted to know everything. That night, Albert could not sleep. He held the compass close to his chest in the dark room and kept thinking about it. There are invisible forces in the world. There are things we cannot see, but they are real. There are mysteries hidden all around us. This moment, this little compass, changed everything. It gave Albert a burning curiosity that would never go out for the rest of his life. A few years later, Albert's family moved to Munich. Hermann had started a small company there with his brother Jakob. Albert began school in Munich, but school was not a happy place for Albert. The classroom was strict and rigid. The teachers stood at the front and talked. The students had to sit perfectly still and memorize everything the teacher said. There was no room for questions. There was no room for imagination. Albert hated it. He would sit at his desk listening to the teacher drone on, and his mind would drift away. He would start thinking about the stars. He would start thinking about light. He would start thinking about time. His teachers noticed that he was not paying attention. "Einstein," one teacher said sharply, tapping his desk. "Why are you not listening?" Albert looked up slowly, his dark eyes calm. "I was thinking, sir." The teacher frowned. "Thinking about what?" "About light," Albert said simply. "About what it would look like if you could travel on a beam of light." The classroom went quiet for a moment. Then some of the other students started to laugh. The teacher shook his head. "That is nonsense, Einstein. Pay attention to what I am teaching." Albert said nothing more, but inside he did not stop thinking about light. Not for 1 second. His teachers saw a boy who was slow, distracted, and difficult. One teacher told him directly, "You will never amount to anything." These words were cruel, they were cold, and they were completely wrong. But at the time, Albert heard them and felt the sharp sting of shame. He went home that day with his head down. He sat at the kitchen table and did not speak. His mother Pauline noticed immediately. She sat down beside him. "What is wrong, Albert?" she asked softly. He looked up at her. His eyes were heavy. "My teacher said I will never amount to anything." Pauline was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and placed her hand gently on his. "Your teacher does not know what you are capable of. I do." Albert looked at her. "You have a mind that thinks differently," she said. "That is not a weakness. It is a gift. Never let anyone take it from you." Albert held her words close to his heart. He needed them many times in the years ahead. There was one light in Albert's school life. That light was mathematics. When Albert was 12 years old, he discovered a book on geometry. It was not an easy book. It was meant for older students. But Albert read it from beginning to end. He could not put it down. The book was full of logic, patterns, and beauty. There were problems that seemed impossible at first, but with careful thinking, they could always be solved. Every problem had an answer. Every mystery had a solution. Albert read it like a story. He was completely amazed. "This book is beautiful," he whispered to himself. "Mathematics is beautiful." From that moment on, Albert taught himself. He borrowed books that were far beyond his school level. He sat alone for hours, working through problems that most adults would find challenging. His uncle Jacob, who was an engineer, saw Albert's talent. He began sending Albert little math puzzles and problems to solve. "I have a problem for you, Albert," Jacob would say with a smile. "Let us see if you can figure it out." Albert loved these challenges. His eyes would light up. He would take the problem home, sit alone with a piece of paper, and work on it until he had the answer. Sometimes it took him an hour. Sometimes it took him a whole day. But he never gave up. He always found the answer. And every time he solved a puzzle, something warm and good spread through his chest. He did not have a word for it at the time, but it was joy. It was the joy of discovery, alongside mathematics. There was another great love in Albert's life. Music came to Albert through his mother. Pauline was a gifted piano player. She believed deeply that music was not just entertainment. It was a language. It was a way of thinking. And she wanted her son to know this language. She gave Albert violin lessons when he was 6 years old. At first, Albert did not enjoy it. The lessons were mechanical and boring. He had to repeat the same notes over and over. He had to follow strict rules about how to hold the bow and where to place his fingers. He felt frustrated. He wanted to understand the music, not just copy it. For years, he practiced without much feeling. He played the notes correctly, but there was no life in it. Then one day, everything changed. Albert was about 13 years old. He was alone in his room, and he picked up his violin without thinking much. He started to play. But instead of following the sheet music exactly, he let his fingers go where they wanted to go. He started to improvise. He played a melody that came from somewhere deep inside him. It was not perfect. It did not follow all the rules. But it was true. It was his own. When he finished, he stood very still for a long moment. He had just understood something important. Music was not about following rules perfectly. Music was about finding the truth inside the sound. It was about feeling something real and expressing it. This idea would shape the way Albert thought about science forever. From that day on, music became as important to Albert as mathematics. For the rest of his life, whenever he was stuck on a difficult problem, he would pick up his violin and play. The music seemed to unlock something in his mind. It helped him think more clearly. He often said later in his life, "If I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician." Mozart was his favorite. He loved the way Mozart's music was so clear, so pure, so perfectly logical. He said once that Mozart's music felt like it had always existed in the universe, and Mozart had simply discovered it. This was exactly how Albert felt about the laws of physics. He believed the universe had a deep, hidden order, a beautiful, hidden music, and his job was to find it. When Albert was 15, something difficult happened. His father's business in Munich failed. Hermann had to close the company. The family had no choice but to leave Germany and move to Italy, to a city called Milan, where some relatives lived. But Albert had to stay behind alone in Munich to finish his school year. This was very hard. He was a teenager, alone in a foreign city, living in a rented room, going to a school that he hated. He had no close friends. He had no family nearby. The winter was gray and cold. He felt completely alone. Some days he would walk along the gray streets of Munich after school, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. He thought about his family far away in warm, sunny Italy. He thought about his mother's cooking. He thought about his sister Maja's laugh. He missed them desperately. He also had a growing problem at school. His attitude and his questions were making his teachers angry. He was asked to leave his school before the year was even finished. A teacher called him into the office and told him he was being expelled. "Your presence disrupts the class," the teacher said coldly. "You undermine the other students' respect for the teacher." Albert sat very quietly. He did not argue. He just took the paper, folded it, put it in his pocket, and walked out. He took the next train to Italy, to Milan, to his family. When he arrived, his mother ran to meet him at the door. She held him tightly and did not let go for a long time. "You are home," she whispered. "I am home," he said. But even as he said those words, he felt a restless energy inside him. He had been thrown out of school. He had no diploma. He had no plan. He was a teenager with nothing on paper and a head full of big ideas. What could he do? Where could he go? He had to find a way forward. Albert decided he wanted to study at a prestigious technical school in Switzerland called the ETH in Zurich. It was one of the best science and mathematics schools in Europe. There was one problem. He was too young, and he had not finished his secondary school. He applied to take the entrance examination anyway. The exam was extremely difficult. Albert sat in a large, quiet hall with other students who were older and more prepared than him. He did well in mathematics and physics. Those sections were easy for him. But he struggled badly with the other subjects, especially French and botany. He failed the exam. He did not get in. Albert felt deeply disappointed. He sat alone that evening and looked out the window at the darkening sky. But the head of the school had noticed something. He had seen Albert's exceptional scores in mathematics and physics. He sent Albert a message. "Your talent is obvious," the message said. "Go and finish your school in Aarau. Come back next year and try again." Albert went to the school in Aarau in Switzerland. And for the first time in his life, he loved school. The school in Aarau was different from everything he had known before. The teachers encouraged students to think for themselves. They asked questions. They discussed ideas. They celebrated curiosity. Albert thrived. He made friends. He laughed. He explored the mountains on weekends. He played his violin in the evenings. One of his friends there was named Marcel Grossman. Marcel was bright, organized, and kind. He and Albert became very close. They talked about science late into the night. They challenged each other. Marcel would become one of the most important people in Albert's life. At this school, Albert also wrote his first important scientific thought. He was 16 years old. He wrote down a question that would haunt him for 10 more years. What would happen if a person could travel alongside a beam of light? What would they see? What would the universe look like from there? He had no answer yet, but the question was alive in him, and it would not let him go. Albert passed his exams and was accepted to the ETH in Zurich. He was happy. He felt like his life was finally beginning. But university was also not easy. Albert continued to follow his own path. He did not attend all his lectures. He found some of his professors boring and slow. He preferred to study on his own, reading the newest scientific papers and theories. He spent hours at the library. He sat at small cafe tables with his notebooks. He thought and wrote and thought some more. His professors were not impressed. One professor, Heinrich Weber, had once thought Albert was brilliant, but as time went on, Weber became irritated by Albert's independence. "You are clever, Einstein," Weber told him one day with a sharp tone, "but you have one serious fault. You will not listen to anyone." Albert stayed quiet, but in his heart, he knew that some things could only be learned alone. Some truths had to be found by yourself. Despite his difficulties with some professors, Albert found something else at university that was very important. He found love. Her name was Mileva Marek. She was the only female student in the physics department. She was serious, intelligent, and strong. She had come from Serbia to study in Zurich, just like Albert had come from Germany. They met in their first year. At first, they studied together. Then they talked long into the nights about science and ideas and dreams. And slowly, they fell deeply in love. Albert wrote her letters that were full of joy and warmth. "My dear Dolly," he wrote, using his nickname for her, "you mean more to me than the whole world. With you beside me, I feel I can understand anything." Mileva wrote back with equal warmth. She believed in him completely. She challenged him. She pushed him to think harder. But their path would not be easy either. Albert graduated from ETH in 1900. He was 21 years old. He needed a job. He wrote letters to professors across Europe, asking for a position as a research assistant. He believed that someone would see his talent and give him a chance. No one replied. He wrote more letters. He asked again. He followed up. He waited. Silence. Rejection after rejection. He applied for teaching positions at schools. He was turned away again and again. He was young, unknown, and without any prestigious connections. He had not impressed his professors enough to earn their recommendations. He was on his own. He had to take small tutoring jobs to earn a little money. He tutored students in mathematics and physics. He was good at it. He was patient and clear. But it was not what he wanted to do with his life. The rejections kept coming. Month after month, 1 year passed. Then another. His father, Herman, watched his son struggle with a heavy heart. Herman had always tried his best for his family, but his businesses had never succeeded. He worried deeply that his son would suffer the same fate. In a private letter to a professor, Herman wrote on behalf of his son, begging for help. He wrote about Albert's situation with such love and sadness that it is painful to read even today. Albert did not know his father had written this letter, and the professor did not respond. Herman died in 1902, not long after, still worried about his son's future. Albert was devastated. He had not been at his father's side when he died. He carried that grief silently for many years. He wrote later that his father's death was one of the deepest shocks of his life. But even in the darkest times, Albert kept thinking. He kept working on his ideas. He never stopped. A friend named Marcel Grossman, the same friend from his school days in Aarau, came to his rescue. Marcel spoke to his father. His father knew an important man named Friedrich Haller, who worked at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. A position had opened up. It was not glamorous. It was not the research job Albert had dreamed of. But it was stable. It was decent. And it came just in time. In 1902, Albert Einstein was hired as a technical expert at the Patent Office in Bern. The Patent Office job was not exciting on the surface. Every day, Albert sat at a desk and examined patent applications. Inventors from all over Switzerland and beyond would send in their ideas for new machines, new devices, new technologies. Albert had to read each application carefully and decide if the idea was original and scientifically sound. He was very good at it. He could read an application quickly and understand it deeply. He could find the flaws that others missed. He could see immediately if an idea was truly new or if it had been done before. His boss was impressed. And here is the most beautiful thing about those years in the patent office. After Albert finished his work for the day, he had something precious. He had time. He had a quiet desk. He had his notebooks. And he had his mind. He kept a small notebook hidden in his desk drawer. When he had a free moment, he would pull it out and write his scientific ideas inside it. He called it, with a smile, his Department of Theoretical Physics. It was a joke, but it was also real. For years, Albert had been thinking about the deepest questions of physics. He had been collecting ideas, testing them in his mind, turning them over and over. Now, in the quiet hours of the patent office, he was finally able to write them down. And in 1905, everything came together. Albert Einstein was 26 years old. He was working at a government patent office. He had no laboratory. He had no assistant. He had no professor guiding him. He had only his mind and his belief that the universe had a hidden order that could be understood. In one single year, he published 4 scientific papers that would completely change the world. The year 1905 would later be called Einstein's miracle year. In that 1 year, working alone in his spare time, Albert wrote 4 papers that each solved a major mystery of physics. The first paper explained something called the photoelectric effect. It showed that light is made of tiny packets of energy, which we now call photons. This paper would eventually help create modern electronics, including the screens you use today. The second paper proved that atoms and molecules are real. At the time, many scientists still debated whether atoms truly existed. Albert's paper proved it in a beautiful and clever way. The third paper introduced something called the special theory of relativity. This completely changed the way scientists think about space, time, and movement. It showed that time is not the same for everyone. It moves differently depending on how fast you are moving. This idea seems impossible, but it is true, and it has been proven many times since then. And the fourth paper. The fourth paper contained the most famous equation in all of history. E equals mc squared, 4 letters. 1 equals sine squared. This tiny equation changed everything. It showed that energy and mass are the same thing. They can be converted into each other. A small amount of mass contains an enormous amount of energy, an unimaginable amount. This equation would eventually lead to nuclear power. It would lead to a deep understanding of the stars and how they burn. It would open doors into the universe that had never been opened before. Albert sent these papers to one of the most important physics journals in the world. He was nobody. He was an unknown patent clerk. He had no university position, no professor's title, no famous name, but his ideas were undeniable. The papers were published, and slowly, quietly at first, the scientific world began to read them. A great physicist named Max Planck, one of the most respected men in science at the time, read Albert's paper on relativity. He stopped. He read it again. He sat back in his chair and was silent for a long time. Then he turned to a colleague and said, quietly and carefully, "This man has done something extraordinary." The world was about to know the name Albert Einstein, but recognition did not come instantly. It took years. Albert continued working at the patent office. He married Mileva in 1903. They had 2 sons together, Hans Albert and Eduard. The family lived simply in a small apartment in Bern. They did not have much money. But there was love, and there was music, and there was always talk of ideas. Albert would come home from the patent office in the evenings, eat dinner with his family, and then sit at his desk and write. He would work until late at night. Mileva looked after the boys. She made the home run. She listened to Albert's ideas and responded thoughtfully. She was his partner in every deep sense. Slowly, letters began to arrive from across Europe. Famous scientists were writing to Albert. They wanted to discuss his papers. They wanted to meet him. They had questions. They had challenges. Albert answered every letter carefully and enthusiastically. In 1907, he had another breakthrough idea. He was sitting at his desk in the patent office when a thought struck him so suddenly and powerfully that he later described it as the happiest thought of my life. He imagined a man falling freely from a rooftop. During that moment of falling, the man would not feel his own weight. Gravity would disappear for him, just for those few seconds of falling. This thought led Albert to a new theory, a theory that would explain gravity itself in a completely new way, a theory he would spend the next 8 years working to complete. It would eventually become the general theory of relativity. But that was still years away. In the meantime, Albert's reputation grew. Universities began to offer him positions. He was finally becoming a professor. He moved from Bern to Zurich, then to Prague, then back to Zurich, and finally to Berlin. His life was changing rapidly. He was meeting the greatest scientists in Europe. He was speaking at international conferences. He was debating ideas with legends of physics. But the man himself remained very simple. He did not dress elegantly. He forgot to comb his hair. He wore the same clothes day after day. He did not care about money or social status. What he cared about was the truth. Albert spent 10 years working on the general theory of relativity. It was the hardest work of his life. The mathematics involved were incredibly complex. Albert had to learn entirely new kinds of mathematics that he had never studied before. He had to ask his old friend Marcel Grossmann for help with the most difficult equations. Marcel, who was now a mathematics professor, sat with Albert for hours, teaching him. Together they worked through the hardest problems. There were many dead ends, many false starts. Albert would believe he had found the answer, and then discover a fatal mistake in his calculations. He would have to start again. He worked through illness. He worked through family difficulties. He worked through the First World War, which had brought enormous pain and destruction to Europe. He was in Berlin when the war began. He hated war deeply. He believed it was one of the great failures of human civilization. He spoke openly against it, even when it was dangerous to do so. But in his study, through all the noise and pain of the world around him, he kept working. And in November 1915, he finally reached the answer. He completed the general theory of relativity. He sat alone with his papers for a long moment. The equations were there, perfect, complete, beautiful. He described it later by saying his heart fluttered in his chest. He was so moved, so overcome with emotion, that he could barely speak. He had done it. He had found something real and deep and true about the universe. He had shown that gravity is not a force pulling things together, as scientists had believed since Newton. Gravity is the bending of space and time itself. Mass bends the fabric of the universe, and objects move along those curves. The universe was not a cold machine. It was something living and curved and beautiful. He sent the paper to be published. And then came the test. Scientists knew that if Einstein's theory was correct, it could be tested in a very specific way. The theory predicted that light from stars would be bent by gravity. When light from a distant star passed very close to the sun's gravity would pull the light slightly off course. The star would appear to be in a slightly different position than it actually was. This could be seen during a solar eclipse, when the sun's own light was blocked by the moon. In May 1919, an astronomer named Arthur Eddington led an expedition to observe a solar eclipse. He set up telescopes and cameras in exactly the right locations. He photographed the stars near the edge of the sun during the eclipse. Then he compared those photographs to photographs of the same stars taken at night when the sun was not nearby. The stars had moved. Their positions were different, and the amount they had moved matched Einstein's prediction almost exactly. The measurements were announced at a major scientific meeting in London in November 1919. A reporter from the Times of London was in the room when the announcement was made. The next morning, the headline read, "Revolution in Science. New Theory of the Universe. Newton's Ideas Overthrown." Albert Einstein became world famous overnight. Overnight, letters and telegrams poured in from every country. Newspapers published his photograph. His name was spoken everywhere. He became the most famous scientist in the world. He was recognized on the street in every city he visited. He did not quite know what to do with it. He had spent his life alone with his thoughts and his notebooks. He had grown up being told he was slow, that he would amount to nothing. And now, suddenly, everyone in the world knew his name. He was kind to the journalists who came to interview him. He was patient with the crowds who gathered wherever he went. He smiled and answered their questions with good humor. But privately, he found fame strange and exhausting. "My life has become a circus," he told a friend, laughing a little. "I never asked for any of this. I only wanted to understand the universe." He still dressed simply. He still forgot to comb his hair. He still preferred a quiet evening with his violin over any grand dinner party. He traveled the world. He gave lectures in Europe, in America, in Japan. Everywhere he went, the reception was extraordinary. In Japan, thousands of people lined the streets just to catch a glimpse of him. He was moved by this. He also used his fame to speak about the things he believed in deeply. He spoke about peace. He spoke about the dignity of every human being. He spoke about the importance of education and free thought. He was a scientist, but he was also a human being who cared very much about humanity. In 1921, Albert Einstein was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. This was the highest honor in science. It is the prize that every scientist dreams of receiving. He was given the prize for his explanation of the photoelectric effect, the paper from his miracle year of 1905. His theory of relativity was still considered too revolutionary and complex to be cited directly by the Nobel Committee. But the world understood. Albert Einstein was the greatest scientist of his time. He received the news with quiet gratitude. He did not throw a party. He did not make a grand speech. He sat with the letter in his hands and thought about the long road that had brought him here. He thought about the little boy who could not speak. He thought about the student who had been told he would amount to nothing. He thought about the young man rejected from every job he applied for. He thought about the years of working alone at a small desk in a patent office, and he felt a deep, quiet thankfulness, not because he was now famous and celebrated, but because he had found the truth he was always looking for. The universe had a hidden music, and he had heard a few of its most beautiful notes. But the world was changing, and not in a good way. In Germany, dark forces were rising. A political movement built on hatred and violence was gaining power. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party were growing stronger every year. Albert Einstein was Jewish, and the Nazis hated Jewish people with a violent, poisonous hatred. They called Einstein's science Jewish physics. They said his theories were lies. They burned his books in public bonfires. They put his name on lists of dangerous enemies of the state. Albert had been in the United States in January 1933 when Hitler came to power. He was visiting the California Institute of Technology. He decided he would not go back to Germany. He resigned from his position at the Berlin Academy of Science. He gave up his German citizenship. He said publicly that he would not return to a country that had descended into such darkness. As long as I have a choice, he said, I will live only in a country where political liberty, tolerance, and equality of all citizens prevail. He settled in Princeton, New Jersey, at the newly formed Institute for Advanced Study. It was a peaceful place, quiet streets, trees, a gentle river. He rode his bicycle around the town and thought about the universe. The local people grew fond of him. Children would stop him on the street. He always stopped to talk to them. He loved children. He believed they asked better questions than most adults. One little girl in Princeton named Adelaide had a charming habit of visiting Albert after school. She would bring him cookies and ask him to help her with her mathematics homework. Her mother found out and was embarrassed. She wrote a letter to Albert, apologizing for her daughter's boldness. Albert wrote back immediately. "Do not worry," he said. "I am getting much more out of our talks than she is." That was Albert Einstein, famous across the world, kind to a child with a math problem. Despite his peaceful life in Princeton, there was a great shadow hanging over the world. The Second World War had begun. Nazi Germany was conquering Europe. Millions of people were being murdered. The world was on fire. And there was a new scientific danger. Scientists had discovered that it was possible to split the nucleus of an atom. And when this happened, a massive amount of energy was released. The energy described by Einstein's own equation, E equals mc squared. Some scientists feared that Nazi Germany was working to build a bomb using this principle, a weapon of unimaginable destructive power, an atomic bomb. Albert Einstein was approached by other scientists who urged him to write a letter to the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. A letter warning him about this danger. Albert agonized over this decision. He was a man of peace. He hated weapons and war. He believed deeply that the purpose of science was to improve human life, not destroy it. But what if Nazi Germany developed this bomb first? The consequences would be unthinkable. He signed the letter. It was sent to President Roosevelt in 1939. The president acted on it. The United States began what would become the Manhattan Project, the effort to develop an atomic bomb. In 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. The destruction was beyond anything the world had ever seen. When Albert Einstein heard the news, he bowed his head. He sat quietly for a very long time. He had not built the bomb. He had not worked on the bomb. His letter had only warned about the possibility. But he knew that his equation, his beautiful equation, was at the heart of it all. "I made one great mistake in my life," he said quietly, "when I signed that letter to President Roosevelt." He spent the rest of his life speaking out against nuclear weapons. He joined with other great thinkers and scientists to demand peace. He believed that the nations of the world needed to learn to work together, to put down their weapons, and to use the power of science to heal rather than to harm. He never stopped believing this. In his later years in Princeton, Albert Einstein became a deeply beloved figure, not just a scientist, a human being, a neighbor, a friend. He still rode his bicycle through the quiet streets. He still played his violin in the evenings. He still thought deeply about the universe every single day. He was trying to find a new theory, a theory that would unite all the forces of the universe into one single, beautiful equation. He called it the unified field theory. He worked on it for 30 years. He never completed it. This unfinished search has sometimes been called his great failure. But those who knew him saw it differently. They saw a man who never stopped reaching, a man who never accepted that there was nothing more to discover, a man who continued to believe until his final breath that the universe had more secrets to give. He received thousands of letters from people all over the world, scientists, students, ordinary people with questions and ideas. He tried to answer as many as he could. He received a letter from a little girl who told him she was afraid because her teacher had said that scientists were all atheists and did not believe in anything. Albert wrote back to her gently. "I am not an atheist," he said. "I feel something that I can only describe as reverence when I stand before the universe, something that is beyond our understanding, but that we can feel. Call it what you will." He was always gentle with those who wrote to him. Even when he was tired, even when his health was failing, he had one guiding belief about people. Every person, no matter how simple or how humble, had the right to ask questions, had the right to wonder, had the right to search for the truth. That was Einstein's gift to the world, not just his equations, his permission, his invitation, his example. You do not have to be perfect to seek the truth. You only have to be curious. On April 17, 1955, Albert Einstein was taken to Princeton Hospital. He was 76 years old. His body had grown weak. He had brought papers with him to the hospital. He was still working. He was still writing equations. Even there, in his hospital bed, he was reaching for one more truth. His assistant later said that when he went to the room the following morning, there were sheets of paper covered with equations on the bedside table. Albert had been working through the night. He died on April 18, 1955, In the early hours of the morning, his last words were spoken in German, and the nurse beside him did not speak German, so no one recorded exactly what he said. But those who loved him believed he died at peace. He had lived a life of searching, of questioning, of never giving up. He had changed the way human beings understand the universe. He had proven that one quiet, persistent mind can alter the course of history. He had begun as a boy who could not speak, a boy who was told he would never amount to anything, a boy who sat alone with his thoughts while the world moved noisily around him, and he had become the most famous scientist who ever lived. What can we learn from this extraordinary life? First, we learn that being different is not a weakness. Albert Einstein thought differently from everyone around him. He learned differently. He spoke differently. He asked different questions. The world called this a problem. History calls it a gift. If you feel like you do not fit in, if you feel like you think in a different way, if you feel like you see things that others do not see, do not be ashamed. Be curious. That difference might be your greatest strength. Second, we learn that failure is not the end. Albert Einstein failed his entrance exam. He was rejected from jobs. He was thrown out of school. He was dismissed by his teachers. He spent years working in a patent office while his dreams waited patiently. Every one of those failures was a stone in the path, not a wall. He kept walking. He kept thinking. He never stopped. Third, we learn that great things take time. Albert did not wake up one morning and write the theory of relativity. He thought about it for 10 years. He worked on it for a decade. He made mistakes. He started again. He asked for help. He kept going. The greatest things in life take time. If you are working on something hard and it is taking a long time, that does not mean you are failing. That might mean you are doing something truly important. Fourth, we learn that curiosity is the greatest human gift. Albert Einstein once said, "I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious." This was too modest. He had enormous talent, but his point was real. Curiosity, the burning desire to understand the world, is what drove everything he did. Never stop being curious. Never stop asking why. Never stop wondering. The universe is full of mysteries, and every mystery is an invitation. Fifth, we learn that simplicity and kindness matter. Albert Einstein was one of the most famous people in the world. He could have lived grandly, surrounded by luxury and power. He chose instead to ride his bicycle, talk to children, and live quietly with his ideas. True greatness does not need to show off. True greatness just keeps working, just keeps caring, just keeps being kind. And so we come to the end of the story of Albert Einstein, a boy who was told he would never amount to anything, a young man rejected by the world, a quiet thinker in a small office, filling notebooks with ideas, a man who heard the hidden music of the universe and wrote it down in equations that changed everything. He never set out to be famous. He never worked to be powerful. He only wanted to understand. He only wanted to know the truth. And in that pure, burning desire, he found something that will last forever. The universe is older than any of us can imagine. It existed for billions of years before any human being walked on this earth. It will exist for billions of years after we are gone. But for a brief, beautiful moment, one man looked up at that vast, mysterious universe and said, "I want to understand you." And the universe slowly, quietly showed him a little of its hidden heart. That is the story of Albert Einstein. That is the story of a life lived in pursuit of truth. That could be your story too. Whatever you are struggling with right now, whatever you have failed at, whatever people have told you that you cannot do, keep asking, keep thinking, keep searching. The greatest discoveries in history were made by people who refused to give up. You are capable of more than you know. The universe is waiting for your question. Moral of the story: curiosity, patience, and the courage to think differently can change the world. Never let failure define you. Let it teach you. Your greatest strength may be the very thing that makes you feel different from everyone else.